Okay, so the previous project focused on the element of line, how it can be actual or implied, oriented vertically, diagonally, or horizontally, and how it can be created through a series of adjacent points, a point in motion, or a connection between points. Next, we'll discuss elements of form, volume and mass, and texture. It's important to note that although we are discussing just a few at one time, these elements are most often used in concert with one another to create successful 3D compositions. In fine art and design, when we discuss the element of form, we are referring to three-dimensionality itself. For example, a circle, a square, and a triangle are two-dimensional shapes, while a sphere, a cube, and a pyramid are three-dimensional forms. Keep in mind that as you plan your next project, most times, but not always, an effective three-dimensional composition balances positive forms or areas of substance with negative space. We can categorize forms into three basic types: geometric, organic, and mechanical forms. As the name suggests, geometrical forms are typically based on cubes, spheres, and other geometric volumes. Ken Price's geometric cup series is an example of this type of form. This abstract ceramic vessel is composed of interlocking rectilinear forms with flat faces and straight edges. I also like to point out that this piece sold at auction for $150,000. It's not often that contemporary ceramics sells for such a high amount, so I'm really proud of that. Next, we have organic form, and this can be observed in Eva Hild's 2008 ceramic sculpture. Organic forms visually suggest nature or natural forces. Hild's work, although abstract, it may remind the viewer of eroded bone or a sea-swept shell. And lastly, we have mechanical form. Andrew Chase's cheetah not only suggests an industrial source, it's created from recycled parts such as gears, electrical conduit, and plumbing parts. The degree of actual or implied movement in a form can be distinguished even further. Static forms appear stable and unmoving. And we can see that in this image. Designed to last forever, the Great Pyramids at Giza exemplify stability and repose. Dynamic forms imply movement, as seen here in the dance by Jean-Baptiste Carpeaux. This is a highly dynamic form dominated by rotating figures and curving lines. And last, we have kinetic forms. These are forms that actually move. This type of form is best described in a video rather than a still image. Oops.
Come with me, Wallace, to a windswept beach in Holland. Because this is home to an incredible creature that only needs a slight breeze to spring into life.
My name is Theo Janssen. We're here in Ypenburg in Holland, where I work every day. And here I try to make new forms of life, which keeps me busy 24 hours a day. And I want to put those out on the beaches where they can live in the future. And they don't have to eat because they get their energy from the wind.
Theo's been making his creatures for over 20 years, and he's evolving such clever designs that one day he hopes they'll be able to leave home and live permanently in the Dutch sand dunes. Incredibly, his animal-like creatures are only made from PVC. Getting them to walk smoothly was the first step, but his animals still needed their creator to get them going. He had to pull his first creatures up into the wind before they could scuttle back up the beach. But Theo didn't want to always have to pull his offspring up the beach, so the next generation got a propeller. And then, to give them more running power, he borrowed nature's best wind design ever and gave them wings. Through hours of experimenting and trial and error, Theo's designs are becoming more and more independent.
What I've found about this experience of making new forms of life is that you discover all the problems which the real creator must have had creating this world. These animals will survive on their own, just like you raise your children and then there comes a day that you can kick them out of the door and that they live their own lives. And hopefully at the end of my life, they will survive a lot better than they do now. Then I could die quietly knowing that I will live on for the beaches, on the beaches.
Next, we'll describe form with degrees of dimensionality. In relief sculpture, the artist uses a flat backing, such as a wall or ceiling, as a base for three-dimensional forms. Artist Louise Nevelson creates larger than life-size relief sculptures with found objects. These objects are arranged, painted in a single color to disguise their original purpose. The arrangement and color of the piece encourages the viewer to focus on the entire composition rather than the individual parts. Next, we have three-quarter work. In this degree of dimensionality, the viewer can nearly walk around the piece, examining the front as well as two sides. We can revisit The Dance by Jean-Baptiste Carpeaux to see an example of three-quarter work. Although the figures are rising from a flat back, the viewer can still see dimension and sculptural details from the sides as well as the front. Some may also describe this piece as suspended relief. Freestanding works are designed to be seen from all sides, as we see here in Auguste Rodin's The Kiss. This piece is cast in bronze metal. However, the artist did make a series of similar sculptures in marble as well. A successful freestanding work should hold the viewer's attention regardless of the vantage point. A little less common are environmental works. These present a space that can physically be entered. We use the term installation for an environmental work presented indoors and earthwork for a piece presented outdoors. An example of installation art can be seen here in Kate McGuire's Sluice. Sluice is a word used for a sliding gate or device for controlling the flow of water. And if we look closely here, we can see the pigeon feathers are flowing from an old water pipe. So I would imagine this piece transforms as more viewers move throughout the space. The lightweight feathers might be disturbed as the wind comes from viewers' legs, moving back and forth in the space. And here we have another image of the installation art. An earthworks piece can be visualized in Patrick Doherty's Wiggle in Its Walk. Unfortunately, this piece from 2011 was not meant to last more than a few years. This is actually just about 20 miles from my home in Ohio. These pieces often extend over great distances in time and space and require substantial physical engagement by the artist, the audience, and inhabitants of the site. Doherty creates earthwork pieces all over the world. His process is very community-centered. He asks local volunteers to collect vines and twigs to help create his sculptures. Visitors can further engage with the piece by walking through it and around it. And moving on to another element of three-dimensional design, we have volume and mass. In general terms, volume is the amount of space an object occupies. In three-dimensional design, volume refers to an enclosed area of three-dimensional space. Cubes, cylinders, cones, spheres, those are among the most prevalent volumes found in both nature and architecture. Fascinated by such biological structures, artist Kendall Buster has created entire exhibitions using large-scale translucent forms. And we saw an interview with her thought process and planning process in a previous lecture. As we can see here in the installation of New Growth from 2007, she uses many different volumes suspended from the ceiling in her work. A mass is a solid three-dimensional form. A massive object can be as dense and heavy as a bar of gold or as light and porous as a sponge. Massive sculptures are often carved from a solid block of plaster, clay, or stone, or cast using bronze, glass, or other materials. Solid and imposing, they tend to dominate the environment in which they are placed. Artist Henry Moore took advantage of the power of mass when he created this piece entitled Locking Piece. In this structure, the primary contours are outer edges, as we see here. So this would be a primary contour or an outer edge. They're complemented by secondary contours created by internal edges. So here are the secondary contours, those internal edges. As the viewer circles the form, these contours visually alternate as the primary contours become the secondary contours, and the secondary contours become the primary contours, hence the name Locking Piece. Henry Moore may be an inspirational artist for you as you pursue your second project. Next, we'll move on to the element of texture. This term refers to the visual or tactile quality of a form or surface. In Blackware Storage Jar by Maria Montoy Martinez and Julian Martinez, a burnished, shiny surface was combined with a subtle matte surface. The visual effect is dramatic despite the minimal textural variation. Geometric patterns enhance the surface of the jar but never compete with the simplicity of the form. In contrast is Walter Altman's Caterpillar suit. It's made up of hundreds of fragments of brass and aluminum wire to recreate the heavily tactile surface of a caterpillar. This is a dominant element of this design. In 3D design, texture can increase the surface area of an object, add contrast, as seen in the Blackware Storage Jar, and enrich our understanding of the physical and conceptual qualities of an object. So to review, we learned that form can be described as geometric, organic, or mechanical, and we can further describe the degree of actual or implied movement with the terms static, dynamic, or kinetic. Next, we describe degrees of dimensionality as relief, three-quarter, freestanding, and environmental works. Our next project will focus on creating freestanding design. As you make your plans, think about what the viewer will gain by walking around your artwork. How much similarity and contrast is needed on each side? I also discussed how volume and mass differ in design. Volume refers to an enclosed three-dimensional space an object occupies, while mass is a solid three-dimensional form. And massive sculptures tend to suggest stability, power, and permanence. As we move forward and transition from sculpting in wire to foam, what are the advantages or disadvantages of having transparent versus opaque volumes? Lastly, I discussed the element of texture. We learned it can add subtle contrast to a ceramic vessel or a heavily tactile surface to a wearable piece of art. As you plan your next design, consider what could successfully, sorry about that. As you plan your next design, consider how the tactile surface visually shifts from polished and smooth to rough and bumpy. Would that enhance or disrupt your design? I look forward to observing how these elements will work in concert in your next project. Have fun and enjoy the next challenge.